Hi, my name is Frank Simmerjay. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here with Trustworthy Computing at Microsoft. With me today I have Mr. Vinny Galato, General Manager of the MMPC, and Mr. Tim Rains, Director with Trustworthy Computing. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'd like to discuss the Security Intelligence Report. This is volume 11 of the report. Tim, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's new in the report.
Sure, Frank. This report contains a lot of new information, as well as the typical information that we publish, so around vulnerabilities, exploits, malware, potentially unwanted software, spam, phishing, and we'll talk about a few of those details here. But in terms of vulnerability disclosures, the news is mixed. We've seen a really healthy drop in vulnerability disclosures in the software industry, a 23% year-over-year drop, which I think is very positive and continues a positive trend for several years now, which is really good. Fortunately, we still see a lot of high-severity vulnerabilities and easy-to-exploit vulnerabilities being disclosed. So, there's still more work to do across the entire software industry. Microsoft vulnerabilities have continued to remain relatively flat. We tend to see our vulnerability disclosures between 3% and 7-8% of the industry across the entire software industry. And so this trend's been pretty consistent over the last 4 or 5 years.
Could you also tell me a little bit about exploits that have arisen that we've seen come around in this edition of the Intelligence Report?
Sure. So exploits, it's been a very active period for exploits the first half of 2011. In particular, we saw a huge volume of Java-related exploits. So Java Virtual Machine, Java Runtime Environment. In particular, we saw 4 Java vulnerabilities being exploited, more than any other vulnerability that we've seen in that time period. And so these vulnerabilities are being exploited. Attackers are using like Java applets. When an applet gets loaded, it exploits a vulnerability, one of the 4 I talked about, and then it'll either elevate the privileges or it'll run arbitrary code. And so we saw those types of exploits at much, much higher volume, much, much higher levels than we saw any other types of exploits.
Now, these were also patched by Sun, I believe.
Absolutely. So, the attackers, we're beginning to see a trend here, a long-term trend, where once attackers figure out how to use an exploit or how to exploit a vulnerability, they'll try to use it forever. And so these exploits in Java that we're talking about here, some of them are as old as 2008. And some of them are as new as 2010. So, at least a year old, and they're continuing to use them and try to use them to exploit unpatched systems on the internet.
Great. Vinny, could you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing, especially you see a great landscape within the Malware Protection Center. What are you seeing as far as the message along the newer systems and the newer capabilities within our products?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had this conversation for quite some time now with a variety of the SIRs that newer is better, right? And the fact that if you're updated, if you're patched, you've got a newer OS, you're going to be much more secure. And I think some of the data that you'll find in the report really backs that up this time. So there's some good hard data. Clearly, users of Windows 7 have a much lower infection rate. We have some charts that show the infection rates on Windows 7 are lower as well. In some cases where, let's say, XP with Service Pack 3 or Vista got an update for this auto run problem that we had a little bit early on, we saw the numbers go down in the infection rates.
Right.
RimCut in particular, the numbers went down on both those OSs. However, ironically enough, or maybe not so ironically enough, with XP Service Pack 2, where the update wasn't applied because it is out of service, right, and out of date, the infections on RimCut went up slightly. So clearly the newer is better. Stays, and that's not any different from what Tim was talking about. When if you've got a Java update, apply that update, you're going to be much more secure.
Right. So patch everything, not just your operating system.
Absolutely. Up the entire stack. Make sure that you patch your OS. Make sure you patch your applications. The smallest patch could make the biggest difference.
What about the Office environment? Do we see the same case with that environment?
Absolutely. So once attackers learn how to exploit a vulnerability in Office, they'll use it forever. And so as we've seen in past, as we've published in past volumes of the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report, these vulnerabilities have a long tail in terms of exploit attempts. And so typically we see a lot of exploits around Office parser, file format parser issues, as well as Adobe and Flash and so on. And so, as Vinny said, it's really, really important to update all of your software, not just Microsoft Windows, but update Office, update Adobe, update all the Oracle, Sun, Java components on the system, because attackers are looking to exploit all of that if they can figure out how to do it.
I think one of the last things that it's important to point out are our browser. I believe that Microsoft actually has received some great accolades for our position with their security in our browser. Either of you have some insight on that?
Well, I think the browser work that's gone on over the past few years, and this is all browsers inclusive naturally, but with the IE browser in particular, with the application of Smart Screen and the phishing filter, I think that's made a pretty big difference, right? Speed is of course important, and performance is important, and our ability to be able to address those for customers, and then have the operating systems be more secure. We work closely with the IE team to make sure we understand what the latest threats are that are being pushed or used through the browser to exploit some type of vulnerability, or just simply prey on potentially a vulnerable server. So while we're having the conversation for the enterprises and the corporations to update, and then of course your mom, my mom, someone's dad, whatever, to update, it's important for the providers to make sure that they've got these services that run this, the backbone, if you will, of the internet, to stay updated, because the bad guys know this as well. And as Tim said, they're going to play a numbers game. They're just going to simply push and push and push. And simply with the amount of malware that we're seeing out there, they'll find something that they can leverage and they could use for a long term.
Right, right. So, as we start wrapping up this conversation today, let me ask you, Tim, what are good things that people can do to protect themselves? What are some of the defensive behaviors?
Sure. So, we mentioned earlier that updating, keeping all of your software up to date is essential. And so make sure that you have automatic updates turned on if you're a consumer. Obviously, if you're in a professionally managed enterprise environment, you have people managing risk for you and using all sorts of software deployment technologies like WSUS and some of the technologies we have here at Microsoft. Use up-to-date antivirus software from a trusted source, right? Because as we've seen in the past, rogue security software, fake antivirus software is just rampant. Keep the signatures up to date, because out-of-date antivirus is only going to be so useful, right? And so as the bad guys move forward, if you don't have updated signatures, you could get taken advantage of. And then, of course, there's all the safe browsing habits.
Right.
Some of the technologies that Vinny mentioned in Internet Explorer, like the Smart Screen filter and the phishing filter and so on, are very, very helpful in blocking millions of exploit attempts.
Sorry, just real quick to follow up on Tim's point. There was an independent test that was done, and IE9 did very well. It was like 96% of the malware that they had tested against, IE9 was able to block. So again, it's while we sound like we're making a pitch for IE, and we certainly are, clearly the newer is better message is what we want people to take into consideration, and then get themselves educated as well as to what's going to work for them.
So upgrade your browser, upgrade your
browser,
system.
upgrade system.
And at least patch if you're not going to be able to upgrade.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much. Tim, Vinny, I appreciate your time today, and this was a really educational opportunity for us to actually have a chat. If you'd like to get more exposure into the intelligence report, please visit Microsoft.com/SIR, and you'll see the full report, all its components. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you listening.